Hi, I'm Marty Nemko. About a year and a half ago, I did one of these podcasts on communicating well. And I feel moved to do a new one because there's so much I want to share with you. I suspect some of it will be redundant, although probably most of you have not watched the first one or heard the first one. So I'm going to share my very best ideas on communication. And of course, rule one is whenever you're communicating in public, you'd never script because it leaches all the chemistry out. So I promise you not to do that. I promise to be authentic, not to exaggerate, not to say things that are, that sound better than in theory than in practice. I will try to be as authentic as I can with you. The first thing, and this is absolutely, if there was ever an idea that I have shared that is widely repeated, it's the traffic light rule. We all know people who are blowhards, chatty Cathys, whatever you want to call them, and they just go on and endlessly. Don't you know somebody like that? Maybe they even think it's you. Well, one of the best antidotes to being a blowhard is the traffic light rule. During the first 30 seconds of an utterance, your light is green. They're listening. There's little risk they're thinking you're talking too much, that they're dying to get in a word edgewise. During the second 30 seconds, your light is yellow. There's an increased risk of those negative things. And at the 60-second mark, the light is red. Usually you want to stop, almost always, although very occasionally, if you're telling a particularly fascinating story, you can go on a little longer. And then at the end, you either shut up or you ask a question. The other antidote to being a blowhard is what I call the 40-60 rule. Normally, you want to talk an average of 40% of the time in a two-person conversation, and the other person 60%. Now, it's going to vary. This brings me to another very important point. No pair is the same. Be alert. Does your person want to talk more? So that maybe you'll only want to talk 25% of the time. Let him or her talk 75%, or vice versa. Be alert. Does the person like when you ask questions? Most people do. Not everybody does. Be alert. Pay attention. That's crucial to communicating. Pay attention. Speaking of questions, it was G.W. Marriott who said that the four most important words in the English language are, what do you think? Most people want to be asked, what do you think? They want to share their opinion. We all want agency. We all want to think we have a smart answer. Nobody wants to be lectured to. Even though I'm lecturing to you now, that's the best I can do. But asking questions, respectful questions. What do you think? Now, this is a related point that is really important. Maybe above everything else in a conversation, you want to default to preserving the person's self-esteem. People hate to be embarrassed. People hate to feel stupid. The more you can make people feel worthy, even if you think you're smarter than they are, you want to try to couch things in a way that allows them to preserve their self-esteem. And that's usually with statements like, I'm wondering about this. What do you think? That preserves their self-esteem. And even if you violently disagree with somebody, it's usually wise to figure to not hit them over the head with it. I could understand why you think that. I'm wondering whether you think this might be as good or a better idea. That's face-saving. Preserves their self-esteem. That said, my goal here is to be, at least where I can be, somewhat nuanced. And that is that sometimes people need this equilibrium. They're too complacent. They're too cocksure of themselves. They think they're holier than thou, and they really are less holier than thou. So at those rare times, you want to create this equilibrium and say something like, I'm not sure you're listening well to me. I would like to ask you to really open your mind to this. What do you think? Now, you won't do that very often, but sometimes that's necessary. And notice I'm using kind of my passionate voice here because I got some criticisms from my last one that I was trying to imitate Lex Friedman too much and being too low-key, and it doesn't work for me. So I'm being authentic. This is Marty Nemko. This is the way I talk to my wife. This is the way I talk to a lot of my clients. And I'm talking to you in as authentic a way as I can be. If you find it too intense, I can't help it. This is myself, for better or worse. Another example of something about being alert. Really figure out if they want to talk about their topic or they would like to hear about yours. Sometimes people are open to learning, love listening. Other people like pontificating. Listen carefully. Put out trial balloons. See what happens when you start to talk and share an idea of yours. Are they beginning to space out? Is their foot shaking, which is one of the ways that people show they're impatient? Are they looking away too much? Are they sighing? Are they interrupting you? All of those are clues. If they're listening, if they're nodding, if they're looking forward, leaning forward, that's a suggestion that they're liking your talking. Not always do you want to surrender to the other person's agenda, but you at least want to be aware and be conscious of whether you want to maintain the agenda, you want to maintain the pace, you want to maintain the topic, you want to maintain the level of intellectuality, or no, do you want to be responsive to them? It's critical. The really good communicator is flexible. One might even say a chameleon, realizing that you are not one person who's got one way of being all the time. So for example, right now I'm talking fairly quickly. This is my normal speech. But if I have a client or a friend who is slower talking, perhaps slower thinking, I'm deliberately now slowing down. Part of the good communicator is being aware of the need of your conversation partner and adjusting to accommodate, right? So it is about, yes, caring about yourself, but not caring so much that you're oblivious to the other person. You want to balance caring about your own needs to speak and style with what theirs is. Okay. I'll give you one other example. I have a client who, even though he's paying by the hour, if I get to business right away, he is uncomfortable. I need to engage in 5 minutes of banter. He likes funny banter back and forth. And so that's not my style. But if I am not to be narcissistic or egotistical or whatever, I need to flex to meet my conversation partner's need, whether it's a client or a friend or my wife. And by the way, people are not always the same. My wife sometimes is in the mood to be in listening mode, sometimes talking mode. You can sometimes, if I sense she's angry about something, and if I'm in the mood, if I can tolerate it, I'm going to say, all right, let me listen. What's going on, really? And then I might lean forward and I'll try to not interrupt. Again, one size does not fit all. Yes, you want to listen mostly and mostly not interrupt. It was a really famous sports agent named Lee Seinberg who said that the worst thing you can do is interrupt. Also, a very famous jury consultant, I don't remember her name now, she also said never interrupt, because sometimes the very best things they're going to say occur after they've had a moment, after they keep talking. They talk it out and they get clearer. Also, it's a sign of disrespect. It's another way that you would show that you're not allowing them to preserve their self-esteem. You're interrupting them and saying you're more important. That said, again, in the nuance, there are times it is appropriate to interrupt. Obviously, if you're bored as hell and they're going on at length, they're not following the traffic light rule or the 40-60 rule that I mentioned earlier, it may be appropriate. Your needs matter too. And so you might well want to interrupt. Or sometimes people welcome being interrupted. They know they tend to go off on tangents and they lose focus. I have certain clients like that, and they thank me for getting them back on track. I might say even, forgive me for interrupting. Oh, it's fine, they'll say sometimes. But if not, I am trying to pay attention, so that I see, everything I do in communication is an experiment. What's working? What's not? I'm watching body language. I'm listening to their tone of voice. I'm looking at whether they interrupt me. One size does not fit all. Communication is about flexibility and a balancing of focusing on yourself and focusing on the other, and it will vary with the situation and with the person. I was having coffee today at a cafe, and there was a couple clearly were just starting to date, and I don't know if she's always this way, but she made a point of mainly just listening and nodding and agreeing. Oh, interesting, and he would keep talking. You'll vary depending upon how much you want that conversation to work. Okay, now I want to talk about when there's disagreement. Something that has worked very well for my wife and I. I tend to be opinionated. I tend to be pretty confident in my opinions. But I've learned that the following works best in terms of, again, allowing me to not just kowtow and be quiet, but yet not try to push my ideas too much. I try to make my case one time, and then I listen carefully to whether it's my wife or my client or my friend's response. And then I'll either try to be, there's a natural tendency for some people to want to argue back. I have a lot of lawyer clients. They tend to like to argue back. I work hard at, when I'm listening to the other person, putting on my statesman's hat, not my advocate's hat. And if I can agree with the person, I say, good point, and I'll drop it. Or if I really think that one rejoinder to the person's response will make a difference, if it's important, if it's an issue worth risking annoying the person because I'm making that rejoinder, then I'll shut up, even if I don't have to win every argument, even if I'm right. But if I think the issue is important enough, and I've made my case, I've listened, and I don't agree, and I think there's another point I either need to re-emphasize or a new point that I need to make in light of what my conversation partner said, I will make one rejoinder, and then almost always I'll drop it from there. I can't control everything. The odds are that if I make that one rejoinder and the person still disagrees, the odds are very unlikely that my additionally making the point, drumming home the point, is unlikely to change the person's mind and more likely to make the person feel antipathy toward me. Usually not worth it. A phrase I love is, I've implied this throughout, but I want to stress it here, is what would the wise one within you do? We all have idiots within us and the wise one within us. The more you can try to say, I could easily get emotionally reactive to this person's a pain in the butt, the person is stupid, the person is mean, the person is whatever, I hate their politics, whatever it is. But if you can try where you can, and it's easier said than done, to always say to yourself, what would the wise one within me do? Would I be silent and wait? Silence is great. I believe where I can, I try to wait one whole second after somebody's finished talking to let them know that I'm just waiting for them to finish so I can get my words them in there. But it also allows me to process. So I default. I don't always do it. And again, different cultures, different people have different paces. Sometimes we do interrupt each other. And it's fun. It's the right. But in general, not only do I try to let people finish, but I will try to wait a second. And I may even sometimes count to myself, 1 Mississippi. Sometimes with somebody, when there's silence, I know that I want them to say the next thing. I may count to 10 to myself and wait them out. And they'll usually say the next thing and either feel respected or have more time to think and certainly not feel like I'm trying to dominate. Okay? So, but always ask yourself, if possible, rather than emotionally reacting, take a deep breath. A deep breath is a great way to slow your heart rate and blood pressure and give you a moment to think. Take a deep breath. Ask yourself, what should the wise one within you do rather than the idiot within you or the impulsive one within you? Again, easier said than done, but it's aspirational and worth aspiring. A variation on this, by the way. I'm always asking myself, and I implied this a little earlier, but I want to stress it here. Disagreeing is not always worth it. Ask yourself, is the price you're likely to pay for expressing that disagreement worth it? And especially if you think it's marginal, make your case briefly, one time, listen to the response, and either agree to disagree, which cuts it short, doesn't metastasize the disagreement into a larger antipathy between each other, or sometimes you think, damn it, it's really worth it. It's worth debating this at length. Sometimes, but the longer that debate should go on, the more important it is to show respect for that person. To say, it's a thought. So what I hear you saying is this. Now I'm not paraphrasing is, it's nice, but you can't do it too often. It's a technique and it's hard to do. But sometimes if you're having to have an extended discussion with somebody, whether it be at a group meeting or one-on-one or whatever, you might say, okay, I think I understand your point. It's this, and you paraphrase it and then say, and I can understand why you'd feel that way. But at least I've found that the following is true. Again, face-saving, not ramming it down their throat, allowing yourself to disagree. We're not asking you just to hide your feelings and be passive about it. But being that statesman or stateswoman, if that's a word, is a really smart way to be the governing principle undergirding your conversations that are important. Again, it may not be so easy, And it may not always be necessary, but certainly in important conversations, it's really important to try to remind yourself at that moment of truth, the very moment you're about to start a conversation like that, or at a stress point where you start to feel yourself getting stressed, that's the time to say, okay, I need to take a breath and ask myself to be my statesman's self here. Okay? So just in sum, a few major points. I've got much more to say, and I'm going to take a break in a minute, but usually default to preserving someone's self-esteem. Balance your own needs in the conversation with that of the other person. Try to stay conscious. Listen. Try to follow the traffic light rule. 30 seconds green, 30 seconds yellow, 10 to 60 seconds red, probably want to stop. 40-60 rule, you normally want to talk a little less than half the time. Be the wise one within you rather than the impulsive one or the angry one if you can. If you need to take a break, breathe. And I'm being honest, I love it because it works so well. Make your case one time, listen your ass off, then agree. There's nothing wrong with agreeing. It makes people feel great. When you say good point, people love it. But if you can't honestly do it and it's important enough, generally you want to issue one rejoinder. Now, a little bit about small talk. Questions are your best friend in small talk, but you can't start with questions or ask too many questions. You're going to seem like you're interrogating. So if I'm at a meeting, a party, or whatever, I usually will start. I will look for somebody. I tend to look to people who are alone. And maybe not the most physically prepossessing, because they particularly might welcome somebody to come over to them, and they may be particularly shy. And I usually start with what I call an environmental comment. By the way, it's not always like I'm speaking to the least attractive person in the room. Sometimes there's a person I know I want to speak with, but I will still usually start with what I call an environmental comment. It has nothing to do with climate change. It is about the immediate environment, whether it's the weather or the food or the music that's in that room or the reason for the conference or whatever. I'll say something like that, like, have you heard the speaker before? Or, hi, I'm Marty, it's nice to meet you. I've been eating too much of that or those hors d'oeuvres or whatever. Little self-deprecation cannot hurt. And then your job is to listen your ass off. And by the way, notice I curse a lot, like listen your ass off. I think that's part of authenticity. That's who I really am. I'm a kid from the Bronx, no matter how old I am. And that, especially because I have a PhD from Berkeley and I have some kind of a reputation, the fact that I sound normal, say things like, I work my ass off or whatever, or I'll say shit or fuck or whatever, and I've checked with my clients about this, and most of them find it comforting that I am not trying to be holier than thou. I'm very colloquial. I try to not be formal. And it may not work for you, but it works for me. So I'm trying to share all these communication ideas with you in a non-scripted way that feels organic. And again, that's authentic. I think none of you think that I'm faking this. I'm trying to, I think I'm conveying that I'm authentically trying to be my best self in sharing my best ideas with you. Also, when I'm not too cocksure of myself, by saying, this isn't always going to work, one size doesn't fit all, nuance, whatever, that's again acknowledging, that's authentic. And it's really more helpful than saying, these are the 7 rules, the keys to communication. No, these are all tips, ideas, suggestions to be adopted with as the situation fits, and as what fits you. Okay. Now, so small talk. My first thing is as I said, an environmental comment, and then afterwards I'm listening and nodding if I can, and then looking for an opportunity to reveal something or ask something. I'll either reveal something about myself or whatever, like, gee, I'm a little nervous coming to this meeting. I'm a new employee, or it's my first time. I don't know very many people at this party. Some little bit of negative reveal tends to build intimacy very quickly. Or I'll ask a question like, have you heard the speaker before? How long have you worked here at this organization? Have you been to this conference long? What, any speakers you're particularly looking forward to? I'll start with something that's not offensive, not too invasive, but I'll ask a question, and again, I'll listen my ass off, and then probably follow up with either another question, but not too many questions, because again, I don't want to seem like an interrogator, or I'm going to reveal something. It's a balance of sharing and asking, listening, sharing, asking, listening, sharing, asking, following the traffic light rule, trying to keep my utterances under 30 seconds, making sure I'm talking a little less than half of the time, unless it's clear to me the person prefers me to talk more, and that's usually because they're asking a follow-up question, or they're nodding, or they're leaning forward. But generally, I want to default to talking a little less than half the time. Okay. Now, I do want to say just a bit about extricating myself from conversations. There's sometimes you're talking with somebody and you've had enough. You want to move on to another person, but you don't want to be rude. So you're looking for the first opportunity after the person is talking, hopefully without interrupting, if they're not so long-winded. You'll then stick your hand out. That's a clue, and say, gee, it was good talking with you. I'm going to go to get something from the buffet table or whatever. And that, or not that you're going to, I want to talk to somebody else because that makes them feel unimportant. By the way, another thing, when I'm talking to somebody at a meeting or a conference, and this is something my daughter learned from Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton, my daughter was her research assistant. Hillary told her, he says, when I talk to anybody, I pretend that they're the most important person in the world. I don't care if Vladimir Putin or Bill Clinton is or Barack Obama is in the room. If I'm talking to anybody, I'm going to look at them while I'm talking with them as though they're the most important person in the world. Not do this, not do that. And that's a really good idea too. No matter who you're talking with, if you're choosing to talk with them, even if it's for 2 or 3 minutes, pay attention. It doesn't mean you stare at them like you're psychotic. You can turn away, but you should be looking at them roughly 2/3, 3/4 of the time. Okay. I want to say a bit about influencing people. Whether you're in conversation trying to get them to buy your ideas, or you're a salesperson, or you're the nonprofit analog of salesperson, you're a fundraiser. There's been much written about it, and I don't want to say what's been so, we hear a lot about commitment bias and confirmation bias and always keep closing and all that stuff. I don't want to say that. I want to say just one thing about influencing people that I have found to be very helpful while still being authentic. If you're trying to make your case about either an argument or your product, or you're trying to raise money for a cause, try to make your ask related to their belief that they've expressed, whether verbally or in writing or whatever. So that if I'm a fundraiser for, the American Cancer Society, I'm listening to what their issue is. Is it they had a family member with cancer? Is it they believe in medical research? Is it that they just care about the relationship and feeling generous? I'm listening to what's in the conversation. I'm listening to what is their primary motivation, and in making the ask, I will address that. So if that person, let's say they believe in basic research, and I would say something rather than applied research, I say, that's really an intelligent point. Most people are very interested in immediate application. Again, I'm building up their self-esteem legitimately. But in the end, a lot of the research we need to do on cancer, notice I said we, need to do on cancer is fundamental, is basic, is the basic mathematics, the basic physics. And so your desire to contribute to basic research is welcome, and I will promise, and this would only be for a significant donation, you can earmark it specifically for basic research. What do you think? And then I'll say, what do you think is the right amount? And I don't say, how much can you give? What's the most you can give? What do you think is the right amount to donate? And I'll shut up. So I've made the ask based on their beliefs, having listened well to them. Right? And again, I'm listening more than talking, in whether I'm selling, fundraising, in conversation with a friend, dating, whatever. Okay, I'm going to take a brief break, just because that's what happens in these podcasts. My announcer is going to make a brief announcement. It'll only be a few seconds. There are no commercials, so I do hope you'll stay with me. Okay, thank you for doing that. I hope for staying with me. I've been talking about sharing what I believe are my best ideas about communicating well. I focused on verbal communication before. Now I want to talk about writing. I'm going to talk about musical communication, because I do play the piano, and I think I have something to say about that. I'll actually play a little something for you. And then I want to end with public speaking. So, I write a lot. I have written 16 books and over 6,000 articles. And obviously, it was some famous person who was a great writer or writing teacher says, you can't teach writing. And I don't think I can teach writing, let alone in the small amount of time I have here. So I just want to share two things. I believe in being the opposite of a James Joyce, who writes whatever he wants, or a Virginia Woolf, who writes whatever stream of consciousness comes to her. I try to balance my own needs with the audience's. I'm always putting myself in the shoe before I write a word or even start to think about the kind of things I want to write. Think about what do I want to write, but I'm thinking about my audience. What do they need to hear? What do they want to hear? What do they not already know? What would they find interesting? Whether it's fiction, or usually I write nonfiction, although I have written some fiction lately, including a new book called Soloists, 123 short stories about introverts and outsiders facing a dilemma. But I'm always thinking, is this fresh? Is this relevant? Is it worth my reader's time? I'm not going to try to show how smart I am. I'm not going to try to do anything other than either educate, make it really worth their time so there's not a lot of padding, or entertain, or ideally a little of both. So I try to balance my own needs and wants with that of my target audience. I think about that a lot before I write a word. And as I said, I'm concise. I recognize people are busy, and they have a million choices of what they're going to read. So I'm going to be concise. Yes, just enough of an introduction to hook the reader, to let them know that what they're going to hear is going to be fresh and important or interesting. And then I get right to the meat, usually give one example or one statistic for each major point, but I don't go on at great length. I have written a 774-page book, and I've written two 400-page dummies books, but I believe that era is over. So that's why I wrote these short stories in my book Soloists. My other new book this year is called Jeremy's Quests. It's subtitled Succeeding and Starting Out. It's only 110 pages, including beautiful watercolor illustrations. I can't draw worth crap, but I have a wonderful illustrator. His name is Siddhartha Malik in India, who's made beautiful watercolors for it. But in any case, my point is brevity. I respect my reader's time, and I encourage you to do the same. It was, I think, Blaise Pascal who wrote, "Forgive me for writing such a long letter. I didn't have time to write a short one." Write the short one. Take the time to write the short one. Distill every extra word. It was the famous E.B. White of Strunk and White in the book The Elements of Style. He says, excise every extra word. That enables you to distill rather than have a diluted soup, which for your article or your book or your story or whatever. Okay, so that's really... Oh, I also write about what I know. That's why so many fiction writers write semi-autobiographical things. Not pure autobiographical, I find that's a little narcissistic, but write from what you know, the geography you know, the personalities you know well, your own personality, your own experiences, so that it's going to be more authentic and it's not going to require as much research. You can't always do that. I mean, James Michener wrote a bunch of books, Hawaii and Poland and about Israel and he can't personally experience all of it. So he was an assiduous researcher, and I guess he had research assistants. But in general, write what you know, and write what's different and what's important. That's all I want to say about writing. Now I want to talk about music. I have been told that if I have, I like to think that my best skill is writing and speaking and thinking on my feet, but I have been told by others that my best ability is playing the piano. And I was trying to think, obviously, piano music is a form of communication. I am amazed that when I'm in a bad mood, I put on upbeat music like, even I'm embarrassed to admit it, 76 trombones, and it puts me in a good mood right away. It's a miracle what music can do. And it can even just make work feel like fun. But what I want to share with you about music, whether you're a music in terms of appreciation or playing, is the importance of music being emotional. I want to take a piece that everybody's heard of as classical, and then I'm going to also play something that I wrote. I can't write music or read music, but I can hear music and have this suite of music that I play. I'm going to play the Moonlight Sonata in a way, just a few lines of it, Beethoven's famous Moonlight Sonata, in a way that's pretty typical. It's not very emotional because his era, he wrote in an era that was pre the Romantic era. So to be too emotional would be seen as out of character. It wasn't what Beethoven intended. But I don't think it's as musical. So I'm going to play the first little bits of it in what I believe is standard professional way. And then I'm going to play it much more emotionally. And you tell me which you will actually appreciate more. All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the webcam so it's dark, so maybe you're not going to be able to see it, but what the hell. See, and again, the what the hell, I think, is a little subtle way of showing authenticity. All right, this is close enough. So, okay, so here is Moonlight Sonata, I believe, played pretty traditionally. So, yeah, forgive me now. You can see that I'm wearing shorts underneath my collared shirt. What the heck? Again. Traditionally. Okay, now I'm going to play it in a way that would be deemed way too romantic for as it was not written as Beethoven intended. You tell me whether you like it better or worse. Of course, I'm biased, but I believe the second way is much more emotional and grabby. Now I want to play something that, again, I concocted in my head. It's called Death, and it's about a person dying. So it starts out not too slow, and then gets slower and slower, and I like to think it exemplifies the power of emotion that can be brought to music, whether you're playing or listening. There you go. Of course, music doesn't have to be poignant. It can be upbeat. Like I said, like 76 trombones. I feel like I got to play that for just a minute. We can't have that said. All right. piano. So now, I wanted to end by talking about public speaking a little bit. Most of it, whether you're giving a toast at a wedding or giving a formal speech or a 2-minute presentation at a meeting or whatever, many of us get to do a certain amount of public speaking. I want to share what I have to say about that. Not a lot, just a little. The biggest mistake you can make is script. It leaches all the chemistry out, as I think I said earlier about this podcast. The key would be to make a few major talking points. What is your audience? Again, put yourself in the shoes of the audience. What do they need to hear? What do they want to hear? What are the main points that are important, not obvious, that are practical applicability, that they can use now, if at all possible? And then, with your talking points, and have them all on an index card or whatever. I avoid PowerPoint, by the way, because if the purpose of a live talk or a talk like this is to connect, it's chemistry. If you're just making points, you could say, if I simply send you the transcript of this, it's one thing. But there is something to hearing my voice, seeing the connection, looking at me, that adds something to the experience. And if you use a PowerPoint, people's eyes are glued on the screen. I am not convinced that's a wise thing to do. I think people use it because they're insecure. I'd rather see you just have an index card or two with your main talking points so you don't get too off track, and you make sure you make your most important points. That said, I think it's important to have one or two stories that is polished. And again, I'd like, for both hopefully entertainment purposes as well as demonstrating what I think a polished story looks like, I'm going to tell you two, and that's how I'm going to end today's podcast. The first is how I got my sweet doggy, Hachi. The Hachi is named after a movie. I'll just tell you about the movie, and again, I'm going to use this storytelling approach, and see if you can figure out the techniques I'm using to make it a well-told story. Nothing I'm going to say to you is a lie or an exaggeration. The absolute truth. The year is 1910. The town is Shibuya, Japan. A professor had a dog named Hachi, and every day the professor would walk with the dog to the train station. The train doors would open, the professor would go in, the doors would close, and Hachi would toddle back home. And at 5 o'clock, the whistle blew for the returning train, and that was the signal for Hachi to return back to the train. The door would open, the professor would come, and they'd walk back home. And they did this every day for a year and a half. And then one day, the 5 o'clock whistle blew, Hachi toddles to the train, door opens, no professor. Professor died at work. I would like you to guess how long Hachi waited for his owner. 10 years, his entire life. The people who lived around the train station took care of sweet Hachi. And there are now 9 statues all over Japan of Hachi because the Japanese particularly value loyalty. And there was a movie made about this story called Hachi with Richard Gere. And that's the first part of the story. So that's how I've told that. Can you think about what I did? I varied my pace. I varied my volume. I asked a question in the middle. I created suspense, and it wasn't too long. Now I'm going to tell you one more story. The year was 1939. The town was Sierpz, Poland. My father, and this is a true story, absolutely, again, no exaggerations at all. My father lived in a halcyon, bucolic town. They never even locked their doors. And one day there was a knock on the door, and it was 2 Nazis in black boots. But unlike in the movies, they didn't yell. One was silent, and the other whispered, "You will be out of your house with only what you can carry on your back by noon tomorrow, or else." And the next day, there weren't 2 Nazis. There were 12, and 2 trucks. And now they were no longer whispering. They went into every Jewish household and said, "Raus!" And they grabbed all of the young people and they put them in one truck and the older ones in another. And my father never saw his parents again. My father was one of 39 men who escaped from the Panari death camp by digging a tunnel. And then he was put on a cargo boat at the end of the war. He was dropped in a by the way, he lived for 2 years in the Black Forest thanks to the goodwill of the Christians who took care of him. Now notice, it's fine for me to have gone back and say, oh, whatever. You don't need to be too polished. Just polished enough. Anyway, he was then dropped in a cargo boat, dropped in the Bronx without a penny to his name. No money, no English, no education, no family. Only the scars of the Holocaust tortures. What did he do? No job was beneath him. He sewed shirts in a factory in Harlem. And what did he do at night? Did he say, I'm exhausted, I'm a Holocaust survivor, I'm going to get drunk? No, he went to Roosevelt High School to learn English, because he knew unless he spoke good English, he would always be consigned to a minimum wage or thereabouts job. And what did he do on Saturday? Did he say, I'm a Holocaust survivor, I worked hard in the factory all day, I went to school at night, I'm going to hang out and watch Saturday morning football? A little joke like that helps. No, he went to the owner of the factory and said, can I take those shirts that I sewed for you during the week and buy them from you wholesale and sell them on the street out of a cardboard box? He bought them for $1, sold them for $1.50. What did he do with the money? Did he go and, spend it on frivolous things? No. We were living in a tenement in the Bronx, 1035 Evergreen Avenue in the Bronx. And he wanted us out of that very dangerous neighborhood. So he saved up enough money for the first and last month's rent on the only store he could afford, a terrible, terrible neighborhood at 105 Moore Street in Brooklyn. And he owned a tiny little store, and it was so small that only most of the merchandise had to be outside, and he couldn't afford a security guard, so when I was 12 years old, I got to be the security guard on Saturdays. So that the kids were always stealing boxes of shirts and whatever. And in fact, 3 times in the middle of the night, we got a call from the police that somebody had committed arson on my father's store. They didn't like a Jewish guy in their neighborhood, even though my father sold really fine, fair-priced products. But that's another story. Anyway, the most memorable moment of my childhood was one day when business was slow, and I am out in front of the store, and my dad is there with me, and there was a parking meter right in front of the store. And I remember having my arm on one side, and my dad having his arm on the other side of the parking meter. And I asked him, I said, Daddy, how come you so rarely talk about the Holocaust? And he stiffened, which is something he rarely did, and he said, Martin, he said, the Nazis took 5 years from my life. I won't give them 1 minute more. He said, Martin, never look back. Always take the next step forward. And I've had the privilege of being a career counselor to some of the most successful people on planet Earth and some real strugglers. And one of the differentiating features is that the successful ones are far more likely to follow my father's advice, even though they had plenty of setbacks. They never look back. They always take the next step forward. So there's an example of a story this was about 3 minutes long, but this was polished. I have given that story, told that story many times. And it doesn't have to be polished. You can say and you can go back and whatever, but it was fairly polished. And it's important when you're public speaking, if you're just giving a 1-minute presentation or whatever, but if you're giving a talk of any length, mostly you want to ad-lib based on some talking points and an index card or 2. But you want to have 1 or maybe 2 stories, maybe a story at the very end or a story at the very beginning. What I do, by the way, with that story is I end most of my talks with that story, and I usually say something like, everything I've created for you, everything I've said to you here in this talk is not at all scripted. Not at all prepared. It's all fresh and new, every talk I give, except for this. And it's not because I promised my father I would tell his story, but I think it offers a lesson that may be the most important of all. So that's that's how I end, and that really gets people's attention. And again, hopefully, they say that one of the best ways to teach is to model. That's my best attempt at modeling. Anyway, those are my best thoughts on public speaking. And earlier on music appreciation or music playing, play for emotion. On writing, balance your own ego with what your audience wants. And in communicating verbally, try to preserve people's self-esteem unless you consciously decide that it's worth creating this equilibrium, and that's rare. Balance, use the traffic light rule. First 30 seconds green, second 30 seconds yellow, 60 seconds red. The 40-60 rule, talk a little less than half the time. Again, balance your needs with theirs. When you're making an argument, just usually you're going to default to making it one time. Listen very carefully, then put your statesman-like hat on and agree if you can, and if not, one brief rejoinder, and after that it's usually worth dropping it. Again, be really conscious of the other person. Do they want you to talk more or less? Do they want to be agreed with or not? Do they want you to be faster or slower, more intellectual, less intellectual, how much small talk to give, etc. Anyway, I could talk more about all this, but you've heard more than enough. I was invited to do longer podcasts, so this is a long one. This is now 46 minutes. So I'll simply say I absolutely thank you if you've endured the whole thing. I hope you found it worthwhile. I certainly welcome your thumbs up and accept your thumbs down. I always look forward to your comments, and especially like it if you hit the share button below. Share on your social media so that my efforts can have broader impact. And I am flattered if you choose to subscribe to my channel. I always like to end each podcast with my favorite phrase, which may be more valuable now than ever. We find comfort among those who agree with us, growth among those who don't.